10 real-life evil stepmothers that will horrify you. Welcome to Creepshow. Today, we're exploring chilling real-life tales of those who went far beyond the stereotype of the evil stepmother. These aren't just characters from dark fairy tales. These are true stories of unimaginable cruelty inflicted by those who should have been caregivers. From manipulation and abuse to unthinkable violence, these stepmothers surpassed even the darkest tales. Join me as we count down the top 10 real-life evil stepmothers that will truly horrify you. Number 10. Monique Dillard Bothuel. In the summer of 2014, Detroit police received an alarming report from Charlie Bothuel IV, who claimed his 12-year-old son, Charlie Bothuel Thethif, had gone missing. According to the father, the young boy had left home after a strict exercise regimen imposed by his parents and had simply vanished. The news sent shockwaves through the community, triggering a large-scale search across the city. For nearly 2 weeks, Charlie Fine's face appeared on missing persons flyers, news programs, and even social media posts, with both family and strangers desperately hoping for his safe return. The case took a shocking turn on June 25, 2014, during a live segment of The Nancy Grace Show. Charlie Bothuel IV appeared on the program to discuss his son's disappearance, looking somber and pleading for his safe return. Suddenly, host Nancy Grace interrupted with a breaking update. Police had just located young Charlie V, alive, hidden in his own basement. The father's shock seemed genuine, but the bizarre circumstances quickly raised suspicion. As police pieced together the story, what they uncovered was a disturbing narrative of manipulation and abuse. Charlie Thethif recounted a harrowing ordeal, pointing to his stepmother Monique Dillard Bothuel as the instigator. According to Charlie, Monique had forced him into the basement on the day he was reported missing. She ordered him to stay hidden, threatening severe consequences if he attempted to leave or make noise. He told investigators he heard Monique call his father, tearfully claiming that he had run away after an argument. The entire incident, it seemed, was a twisted ruse. Hidden in a cramped corner of the basement, Charlie endured nearly 2 weeks of isolation. His stepmother reportedly subjected him to extreme punishments under the guise of discipline. Charlie revealed that he was forced into an intense exercise regimen, hundreds of squats, push-ups, and sit-ups each day, and denied food as a form of control. The physical strain, coupled with near starvation, left him weak, but his stepmother's threats kept him in a state of constant fear. Even when he heard police searching the basement, he remained silent, too terrified to make his presence known. During the investigation, authorities discovered disturbing evidence that corroborated Charlie's claims. The basement had been rigged with makeshift barriers to keep him hidden from sight, and supplies, including food wrappers, suggested he had been kept there deliberately. In his testimony, Charlie stated that Monique had cultivated an environment of fear, convincing him that any attempt to escape or speak out would result in punishment far worse than the basement confinement. Both Charlie's father and stepmother were charged with second-degree child abuse and torture. However, the outcomes of their cases diverged sharply. Mr. Bothuel accepted a plea deal that resulted in 18 months of probation, during which he was required to complete anger management counseling. Monique, however, secured an even more controversial outcome, a secret plea deal that allowed her to avoid jail time entirely. Her criminal record was eventually expunged after 6 months, a decision that drew criticism and left many questioning how justice could have been so lenient in light of Charlie's suffering. For Charlie the Ivy, the experience left lasting scars, both physical and emotional. His testimony revealed the extent of his fear, loneliness, and the betrayal he felt by those who should have been his protectors. The story of Monique Dillard Bothuel stands as a disturbing example of real-life cruelty, a stepmother who not only embraced the stereotype but exceeded it, leaving a young boy to survive an ordeal that mirrored the darkest of fairy tales. Number 9. Danielle Miller. In 2016, Quarryville, Pennsylvania, authorities were alerted to a disturbing case of child abuse that unfolded over several months. A concerned individual, whose identity has remained protected, walked into the local police department with harrowing details about the abuse inflicted upon a young boy by his stepmother, 31-year-old Danielle Miller. Investigators uncovered a disturbing picture of jealousy and cruelty directed at Danielle's 4-year-old stepson. Resentful that he was not her biological child, Danielle allegedly subjected the boy to repeated physical and psychological abuse. Among her cruel punishments, she would force him to consume laxatives and hot sauce, causing him severe discomfort and distress. In her home, she would often bind his legs with tape, leaving him restrained and unable to move for hours. The abuse didn't end there. If the young boy soiled his pull-ups, Danielle made him wear them all day as a form of public humiliation, deepening his isolation. Her cruelty extended to family outings. When Danielle took her biological children to the local fishing creek to play, she forced her stepson to stay alone in the car, watching as his siblings enjoyed themselves nearby. He was denied not only comfort and affection, but even the simple experiences of a normal childhood. The investigation also revealed that the boy's father, Nathan Duke, was fully aware of the abuse, but took no action to intervene or protect his son. As a result, he was charged with endangering the welfare of a child and criminal conspiracy, having allowed the mistreatment to continue unchecked. Danielle Miller now faces a series of charges, including false imprisonment, unlawful restraint, and endangering the welfare of a child. This case sheds light on the consequences of unchecked resentment and abuse within families, and highlights the vulnerability of children who depend on adults for safety, care, and love. Number 8. Melinda Drabek-Critton. The chilling tale of a young girl's ordeal unfolded in the seemingly peaceful city of Madison, Wisconsin in February 2012. A 15-year-old girl, frail and disoriented, was discovered wandering the streets, clad only in pajamas and barefoot. Concerned citizens alerted the authorities, setting in motion a harrowing investigation that would expose a dark secret within the girl's own home. The victim, whose identity remains undisclosed to protect her privacy, recounted a harrowing tale of captivity and abuse. Confined to the basement of her family home, she endured a living nightmare. The basement, transformed into a prison, was equipped with an alarm system and motion sensors, ensuring her isolation and silencing her cries for help. Deprived of basic necessities, the girl was subjected to starvation, physical abuse, and forced to endure the indignity of consuming her own waste. The emotional and psychological torment she endured was immeasurable. The abuse extended beyond physical suffering, as she was sexually assaulted by her stepbrother, Joshua Drabek. At the heart of this horrific ordeal was Melinda Drabek-Critton, the girl's stepmother. While her father, Chad Critton, played a role in the abuse, it was Melinda who emerged as the primary tormentor. Her cruelty and sadistic tendencies instilled a deep-seated fear in the young victim. The trial that followed brought to light the extent of the abuse and the depravity of the perpetrators. Chad and Melinda Critton were convicted of reckless endangerment, child abuse, and causing mental harm to a child. They were each sentenced to 5 years in prison. Joshua Drabek, found guilty of sexual and physical assault, also received a 5-year sentence. The case of the Madison girl serves as a stark reminder of the insidious nature of child abuse. It highlights the importance of community vigilance and the need for robust systems to protect vulnerable children. The enduring impact of such abuse on the victim's physical and psychological well-being underscores the urgent need for comprehensive support services for survivors. Number 7. Catherine Lowe. On January 13, 2011, in Texas, 5-year-old Celeste Lowe was at home, struggling with what seemed to be a stomach bug. Rather than leaving her home to rest, her stepmother, 34-year-old Catherine Lowe, decided to take Celeste to her workplace for the day. Celeste's illness appeared to worsen as the day went on. Witnesses later testified that Celeste appeared pale, even bluish, and seemed too weak to stand on her own. Concerned co-workers urged Catherine to take her stepdaughter to the hospital, but she did not follow their advice. Upon returning home later that day, Catherine and her husband Wesley found that Celeste's condition had become critical. According to the couple's account, Celeste was still vomiting, and the decision was made to take her to the hospital. However, when they arrived, it was clear that they were already too late. Celeste was pronounced dead upon arrival. Medical staff were immediately suspicious, as Celeste's body showed signs that she had died hours earlier. Rigor mortis had set in, and testing confirmed her time of death to be at least 2 hours prior to her arrival at the hospital. An autopsy revealed the shocking cause of Celeste's death. She had suffered severe internal injuries, including extensive internal bleeding, and her death was ruled a homicide. The extent of her injuries indicated that the damage could not have resulted from a simple illness or accident. Authorities launched an investigation to understand what had truly happened that day. During questioning, both Catherine and Wesley Lowe claimed that Celeste had simply been ill and that they had done everything possible to care for her. But as investigators dug deeper, conflicting accounts began to emerge. Catherine's co-workers testified that they had observed Celeste in visibly poor health, noting her pale skin and lack of energy, and advised Catherine to seek medical help. When pressed on why she hadn't done so, Catherine disclosed that she had contacted Wesley during the workday, but he allegedly told her not to bring Celeste to the hospital. He reportedly expressed concerns that if Celeste was taken to the emergency room, Child Protective Services might intervene, hinting at possible past encounters with CPS or fear of scrutiny. The court case that ensued painted a troubling picture of neglect. Prosecutors argued that Catherine's failure to seek timely medical attention directly contributed to Celeste's death, while Wesley's alleged instructions to avoid medical intervention highlighted a disregard for the child's well-being. The court ultimately found Catherine guilty of manslaughter, sentencing her to 25 years in prison. Wesley faced charges of negligent homicide, but those charges were later dropped, sparking debate and criticism regarding the lack of accountability in his role. Celeste's death underscores the profound consequences of neglect and the tragic outcomes that can arise when a child's health and safety are compromised. Her case serves as a grim reminder of the need for intervention and the responsibilities caregivers have in protecting those most vulnerable. Number 6. Sue Ann Hobson. On April 17, 1980, 13-year-old Chris Hobson was reported missing from his home in Overland Park, Kansas. His father, Edward Hobson, filed the report, worried about his son's disappearance. Less than a month later, the search came to a tragic end when Chris's body was discovered in a shallow grave. He had been shot multiple times, in the head and chest. The nature of his injuries and the manner in which he was buried suggested a planned and calculated act of violence, leaving the community stunned. The investigation took a dark turn when 16-year-old James Jimmy Crum, Chris's stepbrother, was taken into custody. In a shocking confession, Jimmy admitted to the murder and implicated 2 others: his mother, 39-year-old Sue Ann Hobson, and his friend Paul Sorrentino, also 16. Jimmy's account of the events revealed a story of calculated cruelty and betrayal, painting his mother as the instigator of the horrific plan. According to Jimmy, Sue Ann had been attempting to remove Chris from their lives for some time. She had allegedly first tried to kill him by poisoning his ice cream, a plan that failed. Undeterred, she then enlisted Jimmy and Paul to carry out the murder, allegedly telling them she wanted Chris gone by Christmas to avoid having to buy him any gifts. Her chilling motivation turned what was already a tragic crime into a story of heartless indifference. On the night of the murder, Jimmy and Paul lured Chris from the Hobson residence, pretending they were going on a simple drive. They took him through remote back roads before stopping at a secluded dead-end spot. Under the guise of a game, they instructed Chris to dig a shallow grave, telling him they wanted to see if it was big enough. Once the grave was prepared, they had Chris lie in it to try it out. In a coordinated act, the two boys then counted to 3 and took turns shooting Chris, leaving him in the grave they had forced him to dig. With the confessions and evidence in hand, authorities charged Sue-Ann, Jimmy, and Paul with murder. The case went to trial, where the shocking details of Sue-Ann's involvement and her manipulation of the two teenagers horrified the public. All 3 were sentenced to life in prison, with each receiving a sentence that reflected the gravity of their crime. Decades later, in 2011, Sue-Ann Hobson was granted parole and released from prison. She returned to live with her husband Edward, despite the family tragedy her actions had caused. Her release sparked controversy, with many questioning how someone convicted of such a brutal crime could re-enter society. Jimmy and Paul, however, remain incarcerated. The case of Sue-Ann Hobson stands as a stark reminder of the cruelty that can emerge from those closest to us. It is a story of betrayal and the tragic loss of a young life to selfish and calculated motives, casting a shadow over a family forever. Number 5. Heather Jones. On November 25, 2015, police in Kansas City, Kansas, responded to a call regarding a domestic disturbance at the home of Michael and Heather Jones. What began as a routine response to a domestic dispute quickly spiraled into one of the most horrifying cases of abuse authorities had ever encountered. Upon arrival, officers noted signs of severe dysfunction within the household. During the investigation, they learned of an unsettling detail. The couple's 7-year-old son, Adrian Jones, had not been seen for several months. The explanation given by Heather and Michael raised red flags, prompting officers to pursue further inquiries. The authorities decided to search the property, and within days, a warrant was secured. What they discovered on the premises would haunt the investigative team for years to come. Inside a barn on the property, officers found human remains. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was Adrian. The little boy had suffered unimaginable abuse before his death. District attorney officials later described the case as one of the most disturbing in their careers, detailing how Adrian had been systematically neglected, starved, beaten, and subjected to psychological torture. Evidence suggested that after he died, his body had been disposed of in the most inhumane way imaginable. Parts of him had been fed to pigs. Details that emerged during the investigation painted a horrifying picture of Adrian's final months. According to testimony and evidence presented later, the abuse Adrian suffered was relentless and calculated. He had been confined, isolated, and deprived of food and water for extended periods. Surveillance footage found on devices within the home depicted Adrian locked in a shower stall, shivering, emaciated, and visibly terrified. Investigators uncovered videos and photos showing him with bruises, cuts, and signs of starvation. The footage documented the relentless cruelty he endured, revealing that his suffering had been recorded by the very people responsible for protecting him. Heather Jones, Adrian's stepmother, was eventually arrested and charged with his murder. During questioning, she admitted to her role in his death. Evidence also implicated Michael Jones, Adrian's father, who had allegedly taken an active part in the abuse. Witnesses and neighbors reported having seen signs of trouble within the household, though few could have imagined the extent of the violence and neglect Adrian had endured. In court, Heather Jones pleaded guilty to the murder of her stepson. Her admission of guilt led to a life sentence, with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. Michael Jones was also charged with first-degree murder and remains in custody, awaiting trial. His role in the prolonged torture and death of his son has drawn widespread condemnation. The case of Adrian Jones serves as a tragic example of the horrific consequences of unchecked abuse within the home. Despite living in plain sight, Adrian's suffering went unnoticed by those who might have helped him, leaving him isolated with the people who ultimately became his tormentors. The brutality and callousness surrounding his death shocked the community, casting a long shadow over a family that had descended into unimaginable cruelty. Adrian's death serves as a powerful call to action for communities and officials alike to be vigilant in cases of suspected abuse. His story remains a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of children in abusive environments and the critical need for early intervention to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Number 4. Renee King. On November 20th, 2010, 911 operators in Macomb County, Michigan, received an emergency call from 29-year-old Renee King. She reported that her 2-year-old stepdaughter, Lily Furneaux, was unconscious. According to Renee, she had been giving Lily a bath when her back suddenly gave out, causing her to accidentally drop the child. However, when first responders arrived at the scene, Lily's injuries appeared severe and inconsistent with Renee's explanation, raising immediate suspicion among authorities. Lily was pronounced dead shortly after first responders arrived, and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of her death. The coroner's report revealed a chilling truth. It was determined that Lily had died at least 2 hours before Renee placed the 911 call, and the extent of her injuries painted a much darker picture. Lily had sustained at least 20 blows to her head, causing severe trauma, and there was evidence of a penetrating injury, indicating sexual assault. The injuries made it clear that her death was neither accidental nor sudden. Investigators began to piece together what had really happened in the hours leading up to Lily's death. In their findings, they learned that Renee had grown increasingly frustrated with the 2-year-old, primarily over behavior, typical for children Lily's age, such as soiling her pants and having temper tantrums. Witnesses and evidence presented at trial suggested that Renee directed her anger and resentment toward Lily in violent outbursts, leading to the child's tragic death. Renee King was subsequently arrested and faced multiple charges, including felony murder, child abuse, and criminal sexual conduct. During the trial, prosecutors presented the evidence that highlighted a pattern of mistreatment and abuse. Renee's claim that Lily's death was accidental fell apart under scrutiny, as the details of Lily's injuries contradicted her version of events. Witnesses provided additional context, revealing that Renee's frustration with Lily had been simmering for some time and had culminated in an act of violence. The court ultimately convicted Renee on all charges. The judge, moved by the brutality of the case, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would not be able to harm another child again. Due to the egregious nature of the crime, the judge also imposed an additional 30 to 50 years for the sexual assault and an additional 5 to 7 years for child abuse. Lily's tragic death left the community mourning the loss of a young life taken far too soon. The sentence imposed on Renee King served as a grim reminder of the justice system's commitment to protect vulnerable children and a stern message about the consequences for those who abuse them. Number 3. Elisa Baker. Born on November 16, 1999, in Wagga Wagga, Australia, Zara Baker entered the world under difficult circumstances. Her mother struggled with postnatal depression and ultimately decided to relinquish custody of Zara to her father, Adam Baker. Tragically, Zara's life would only grow more challenging. At the age of 5, she was diagnosed with bone cancer, leading to the loss of part of her left leg and her hearing. Despite these hardships, Zara's resilient spirit shone through as she adjusted to life with a prosthetic leg and hearing aids. In 2008, with Zara's cancer in remission, Adam Baker sought a fresh start for them both and relocated to the United States. He was newly married to Elisa Baker, and the family settled in Hickory, North Carolina. But the new beginning would soon spiral into a nightmare that ended in tragedy for young Zara. On October 9, 2010, Adam called 911 to report Zara missing. He explained to the operator that the day before, someone had set fire to the property and left a ransom note intended for his boss's daughter, leading him to believe Zara had been mistakenly abducted. The peculiar nature of the report raised questions, and police launched an investigation that would uncover a horrific story. As investigators delved into the case, they realized that no one had seen Zara for at least 2 weeks prior to the 911 call. Friends, neighbors, and teachers reported that Zara hadn't been to school or in the public eye for some time, prompting suspicions. Under pressure, Elisa's demeanor began to crack. Eventually, she confessed to police that Zara was dead, admitting she had dismembered her stepdaughter's body in the bathtub and disposed of her remains at various locations across Hickory. Elisa attempted to implicate Adam in the crime, but the evidence did not support her claims, and police ultimately eliminated him as a suspect. Investigators determined that Elisa had been the sole perpetrator. In court, Elisa pleaded guilty to Zara's murder and was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. During the proceedings, grisly details of Zara's final days emerged, revealing the extent of the abuse she endured at the hands of her stepmother. In 2013, Elisa conducted an interview in which she claimed she was innocent and that Adam had been the true killer. However, her claims lacked credible evidence and contradicted her prior confessions. Investigators and the public alike saw her interview as an attempt to shift blame and evade responsibility for her actions. The tragic case of Zara Baker serves as a haunting reminder of the suffering that vulnerable children can endure behind closed doors. Zara, who had overcome so many challenges, was denied the chance to live a full life. Her resilience met with unimaginable cruelty. Her story left a lasting impact on the community and underscored the importance of vigilance in protecting children who may be suffering in silence. Number 2. Tracy Wright. Lauren Wright's short life was marked by pain, neglect, and tragedy. Born in Welney, Norfolk, UK, she was unwanted from the day of her birth, and for 6 heartbreaking years, she endured unimaginable suffering. In 1997, her mother abandoned her during a holiday in Turkey. When she returned to the UK, Lauren's father, Craig Wright, was awarded custody. But rather than a new beginning, this move led Lauren further into a life of hardship. In 1999, Craig married Tracy Scarf, a school playground supervisor, and he and Lauren moved in with her and her 2 children. Almost immediately, Tracy showed an open resentment toward Lauren. While she doted on her biological children, Tracy subjected Lauren to severe discrimination and withheld any semblance of love or care. Soon, her disdain turned into brutal abuse, with Craig passively turning a blind eye to his daughter's suffering. The signs of abuse were tragically visible. Lauren frequently appeared with bruises on her face and body, but Tracy had ready explanations for each injury. In early 2000, Lauren's teacher noticed the bruises and expressed concern, arranging a meeting with Tracy. During this meeting, Tracy deflected blame, claiming that Lauren was being bullied by classmates. This pattern of denial and deflection continued, even as neighbors began reporting their concerns to social services. Norfolk Social Services opened an investigation, noting Lauren's alarming physical state. She was underweight, covered in bruises, and even losing her hair, a clear sign of severe distress. Yet Tracy's explanations of accidents and bullying at school seemed plausible enough to the examining pediatrician. Tragically, social services accepted these claims and returned Lauren to the household without taking further action. Over the following months, multiple calls about Lauren's condition were made to social services, but these reports were dismissed or inadequately investigated. By the spring of 2000, Lauren's abuse had escalated to a devastating level. She was often bedridden, unable to eat or drink due to severe physical injuries. On May 6, 2000, she died from a blow to her abdomen so forceful it caused her digestive system to collapse. Her suffering was over, but the horror of her final moments left a mark on the community. The court sentenced Craig Wright to 6 years in prison for turning a blind eye to his daughter's suffering. Tracy Wright, the main perpetrator of the abuse, received a sentence of 15 years for her role in Lauren's death. While in prison, Tracy was attacked by other inmates, a grim reflection of society's anger toward her actions. Lauren's death sparked outrage, leading a local member of parliament, MP, to call for a public inquiry into how social services failed to protect her. Her story stands as a haunting example of the consequences of neglect, not only by caregivers, but by a system meant to protect the most vulnerable. Number 1. Heather Leavell-Keaton. Heather Leavell-Keaton's story is one of jealousy and cruelty that resulted in unimaginable tragedy. Heather, 26, resented the attention her 5-year-old stepdaughter, Natalie DeBlas, received from family, particularly from her grandmother. Under Heather's influence, Natalie became increasingly isolated, losing touch with her grandmother and eventually becoming withdrawn. When Natalie didn't respond to Heather's demands for attention, Heather turned to physical abuse, escalating in cruelty by poisoning the child with antifreeze, which she discreetly added to the girl's sippy cup. On March 20, 2010, Heather gave Natalie an especially high dose of antifreeze, causing the little girl to become violently ill, writhing in pain and screaming. As her cries grew louder, Heather and her partner, Natalie's father, John DeBlas, duct-taped Natalie's hands and feet, forcing her into a suitcase to silence her. In a twisted act he would later describe as a mercy killing, John strangled his daughter to death. The couple then drove to a secluded wooded area where they discarded her body. But Natalie's absence was soon noticed by her younger brother, 3-year-old Chase, who innocently began asking where his sister had gone. Fearing that the little boy would unknowingly reveal their horrific secret, Heather and John made another devastating decision. 3 months after Natalie's death, Heather administered antifreeze to Chase as well. In an act of cruelty, she tied him to a broom handle and left him alone in the bedroom overnight. The next day, John strangled his son, disposing of his body in the woods, just as they had done with Natalie. The case of Heather Leavell-Keaton and John DeBlas shocked the nation. Both were ultimately found guilty of capital murder for their actions, and both received death sentences, making Heather the first woman in Mobile County, Alabama, to be sent to death row. The story of Natalie and Chase DeBlas remains a haunting reminder of the horrors that can unfold within a home, where the bonds of family are twisted into acts of unimaginable cruelty. Thank you for joining me on Creepshow. These tragic stories remind us that not all family roles are filled with love and care. It's deeply unsettling to think of the cruelty inflicted by those who should protect the most vulnerable. If any of these cases shocked you, or if there's a story you'd like us to cover next, let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on more true crime stories lurking in the shadows. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the darkest places are right at home.